All right, everybody. It is the Fight Business Podcast here on Thursday, August 13th, coming at you live from Austin, Texas. It's me, Patrick Auger, your one and only business expert for MMA. So, obviously, as you can see, there's no other guests. Michael isn't here. He got COVID, and sadly, just RIP. No, that's not really what happened. We're changing up the format a little bit. We're going to do some solo shows, talk about some business topics that are going on in the MMA world. And then, we'll still have interviews now and then once we line them up. But we figured we should get a consistent show out there, just talk about some business side stuff. So feel free to like and subscribe. And also, if you have any questions or anything you want me to talk about or any questions about the business side of stuff, hit me up either at alldayauger on Twitter or at the Body Lock, or just comment on this video and say, hey, for the next video, we'd like you to talk about this, and I will gladly do it. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right in. So first up, I want to talk about Sean O'Malley, the Sugar Show, and his apparel line. So for those of you that haven't heard, we did a video on this a while back, me and Michael, talking about Sean O'Malley essentially is fighting for his rights off, his merchandise rights off of his name. His Reebok jerseys have sold around, he says, 1 million in Reebok jerseys, and he got 3% of that or something along those lines. Complained about it vocally online, and Reebok said, hey, that's between the UFC and you. It's not between us. And we didn't really hear much of a peep. Then he came back and released 200 limited edition jerseys for $100 a piece that sold out in 39 seconds, according to him. So that's 20 grand for 39 seconds of apparel. So that gives you an idea of the, drawing power that he has. If you had any doubt about whether the Sugar Show was a UFC production or was genuinely had some drawing power behind it, the fact that he sold out 200 jerseys in 39 seconds when they were $100 a piece in the middle of a pandemic, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that that's a confirmation he has real drawing power. So with that in mind, he started sugarshow.co, where you can now buy all his items, and he's got some jerseys up there, hoodies, a bunch of different apparel. I believe that is live. So O'Malley obviously is a real draw. He's made more money in a day, in 39 seconds than he did in his entire Reebok career. That, I don't know how many of you out there are making 20 grand in 39 seconds, but I sure am not. So he's certainly a draw. With Venom coming into the picture now, there's no telling if there's going to be a restructure of fees where the fighters are going to actually get more. It's very possible that the UFC has already negotiated the deal with Venom to keep the fighter pay as is for apparel and to essentially, keep the split, whatever it is with the UFC and Venom. They could up the percentage a little bit. You might see a bump, just, new sponsor, we'll give a little bit more to the fighters. But in general, my guess is they will keep the lion's share split between those two companies. So in the meantime, O'Malley has figured out, hey, if I do this on my own, I'm going to make way more money. It's all mine to keep, barring the distribution partners for making the clothes and all of that. But he's getting the lion's share, obviously, in that scenario. And this is something that a lot of fighters can learn. You can't do sponsors like you used to before Reebok came into the picture. I don't imagine you ever will be able to, especially given how lucrative it is for the UFC to have a set sponsor that's making all the apparel. Not only does it cut down on economies of scale from a production standpoint for a company like Venom or Reebok, but the UFC is going to be able to just, say, hey, come sponsor. You not only do you get Sean O'Malley, you get John Jones, you get Conor McGregor, you get all of our fighters. Please pay us a ton of money to do so. And we're the gatekeeper for them. So I don't ever see it going back to where it was, where fighters are able to use individual sponsors in the UFC. That just doesn't seem feasible. It's too much money for the promotion. But in terms of what fighters can do to combat that is make your own unique apparel lines, especially if you're a more popular fighter, especially if you're a champion. I know champions get a boost in apparel pay for Reebok. There's the champion clause where you get, I believe it's 45 or 50 grand for being a champion, current champion with the promotion. That's nice, but you could sell far more merchandise on your own, just as O'Malley has demonstrated. Because while O'Malley is a draw and he's more of a mainstream-esque fighter, he's not, anywhere along the lines of John Jones, of even current champions. I feel like DC and Stipe could both benefit from their own apparel line. Looking at other fighters, Adesanya, that especially, I think that would be huge for him, because he's not quite the level of John Jones or Conor McGregor in terms of a crossover star, but he's getting there, and he's got that big MMA machine behind him in the promotion and media. So that right there, I think, is a great opportunity. The point here is that if you're a fighter, you've got to be creative. You've got to go these other routes in order to make up that revenue that the company has taken away from you. You've got to think of yourself as your own mini business. That's something Max Holloway can attest to with the person that's now making him have a brand. Max Holloway now has said he's building the Max Holloway brand to do more videos, to do more side sponsorships. That's what you have to do as a fighter in order to make that money up, if you want that money. Otherwise, UFC is going to continue to put things in place that makes it much more lucrative for them and gives the fighters a piece of it, but nothing along the lines of what you could make by doing what O'Malley is doing. So kudos to Sean O'Malley for going that route. I think it's a great idea. I think other fighters should adopt it. I would love to see it expand into other things beyond jerseys. Look at, new creative ways to market yourself, whether that's your own sports drink, whether that's your own sneaker. I guess that's apparel, but you know what I'm saying. So that's something I would expect down the line. We're going to see a lot more of as this continues, and as the UFC goes on, that is. So next topic, wanted to go ahead and just jump right into this one because I know you all saw it. Paige VanZant has signed with Bare-Knuckle FC. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. One, if you recall, Paige VanZant famously said that she made more money off of Instagram than she did fighting in the UFC. I wholeheartedly believe that to be true. Instagram models, Instagram influencers, it's a big deal. And she has a lot. She has a lot more than people realize, I think, especially in the MMA community. I think people look at her and say, oh, she's a pretty face. She did some things. Yeah. But she's more of a mainstream star than a lot of other people. I would argue, I know I'm going to get flack for this, so go ahead and give me as much flack as you want. Just bring the hate. I will debate this all day. I would argue she has more mainstream appeal right now than Adesanya. I would also argue she has more mainstream appeal right now than Stipe, DC, all those guys. And simply because her real revenue and drawing power is not in MMA. It is on Instagram. It's on her Dancing with the Stars stint. There are a bunch of people. My mom knows who Paige VanZant is. Never watched her fight in her life. Just knows, oh, that MMA chick. Oh, I saw something, She's capturing that audience. She's capturing the suburban, middle-aged housewife model that is not watching MMA on a regular basis. She's captured a lot more of that than I think people realize. So the fact that then she turns around and signs with Bare-Knuckle FC, why is she going to do that? That seems terrible. Again, somebody on Twitter put up the picture of Jason Knight's face after his fight with Artem Lobov. Lots of stitches. If that's her moneymaker, why is she, getting in the Bare-Knuckle FC ring? I think there's a couple reasons. One, the contract is reportedly worth over $1 million. For those of you that don't think that's possible, I definitely think it is. I don't think it's, hey, here's a lump sum of $1 million and you're good to go. I think it's, a per fight basis. I bet there's some appearances and things like that in there. There are incentives built in on top of the $1 million. So that says a lot. That's a lucrative contract. That's much more than she was making in the UFC. I believe UFC, her last fight was 46 to show, 46 to win, I believe is what she had. So, she's making way more money in Bare-Knuckle than she ever was in the UFC. And she's going to be a star in Bare-Knuckle. How successful is she going to be? That I don't know. You look at Beck Rawlings. I think that's a perfect example of someone who kind of washed out in the UFC and then, was a great boxer, but just struggled in some of the other facets of MMA, and now, is done far better in bare knuckle. I think Paige VanZant can do that too. I think she believes, and I think Dave Feldman believes, the owner of Bare Knuckle FC, that she can be the face of the organization. I think, especially if she becomes a champion, I think that's going to draw in a lot of casual people. I think it's going to be more drawing power than the MMA community realizes, because the MMA community has seen her in the UFC not do so hot in terms of her competition. So I think those are big pieces of it. I think the last piece of it that is crucial is Paige has always stated that she likes fighting. She's always essentially said, she wants to fight. She enjoys doing it. If she didn't, she could easily just become an Instagram model at this point, or, an influencer, or do something along those lines. She's got enough of a following now. She's got that suburban housewife, people knowing her. She doesn't need MMA anymore. She really doesn't. And she doesn't need BKFC, but she enjoys it. And I think this is a way for her to get that need to fight satisfied while also getting paid what she perceives her worth is. And what I would argue her worth, I don't know exactly. I don't know based on, her actual drawing power in terms of selling a set product on Instagram or something of that nature. I don't know what she does in that regard, but based on the amount of followers she has social media wise, you could easily think that she does pretty well. And her perceived worth is much more likely being met by BKFC than the UFC as a package, not as a fighter. I think she's being overpaid as a fighter. That I will say. Paige, if you see this for some reason and you want to give me crap, by all means, sorry. But as an overall package and drawing power, I think that BKFC is much more in line with her overall draw power there. So I think that's why she signed. I think that's why Dave Feldman got that deal done. And again, if she becomes champion, I would expect you might see BKFC numbers ticking up. All right, next story. So the PFL has started an OTT streaming service, an over-the-top streaming service, for those of you that don't know what that means, in order to engage fans, allow them to watch fights, see behind-the-scenes specials, do a lot of marketing, essentially. But it's also a way to, while they're obviously not going to fight in 2020, it's also a way to keep fans engaged with the product and give them some revenue at the same time. Now, let me explain why. When you do an over-the-top streaming service, or a network that's free, right? Bellator also recently announced, for example, that they're on Pluto TV, which calls itself a TV channel. It's more of an OTT than a TV channel, but technically, I believe they're both. They're actually on cable as well as an OTT. So it's a little bit of a hybrid there. But the point of them doing that is it helps engage fans, but it also, if you're watching PFL or Bellator or Combate or Glory on one of those free services, which you can do, Pluto TV has Bellator, Combate, and Glory, and then PFL has their own free streaming service. A big part of that is ad revenue. The two ways that you make money from an OTT service are either subscriptions like DAZN, and DAZN and ESPN Plus, or ad revenue such as Pluto TV. And what that means is you're going to be watching these fights, you're going to be watching, these behind the scene exclusive clips, or, title fights from wherever, or the greatest knockouts shows, whatever content they provide. And there's going to be ads either, as in YouTube, here's an ad at the beginning or in the middle, or there's going to be ads on the side where it's just like, hey, here's our favorite soft drink. Here's, I forget what the name of that beer is. I think it's El Presidente or something along those lines for PFL. But so, you're going to see those ads, and based on the amount of views they have, just like YouTube, that will bring in ad revenue. They'll be able to pitch to advertisers to say, hey, come advertise on our platform, and, look at how many views we have for all of our stuff. And it's going to work like that. It's going to work like YouTube, essentially, is the easiest way to break it down for those that don't understand how that service works. Is think of YouTube. Think about how you watch your favorite YouTube people, or about YouTube stars like Logan Paul or all those people. God, who's going to fight again. We'll get into that some other day. But that's a same type of model. They can make a lot of money that way, a lot more than people realize. So especially since they're not having a season right now, it's a great move by the PFL, and I think it's something they're going to push heavily even when they do end up resuming fights. Now, Bellator, again, that's just more revenue for them. Bellator's back in business, but it's the same as Fight Pass, only instead of a subscription where, you're paying for Fight Pass to get those old fights in that library because the UFC has, Strikeforce and Pride and has a premium on that market. Bellator is just saying, hey, just watch some ads and then you can watch whatever Bellator fight you want. Smart moves, especially right now in the pandemic when revenue is hurting. In some cases, it could make up for gate, depending on the particular show, right? If I have a Bellator card that is headlined by, two people that may be names in the MMA space, but aren't gonna, bring in any casual viewers, and the cards I'm talking about here, right? If you put on a card like that, who knows what the gate is going to be? Ideally, the gate's going to bring in a lot of your money. But if the gate is lower, if the gate is, if it's out in Oklahoma City and the gate is or WinStar, which isn't really Oklahoma City, but where they tend to have fights, and the gate is lower, something like that could supplant that revenue that they're losing out on gate because, hey, you've got 20,000 people watching an old Douglas Lima fight, and an advertiser looks at that and says, yeah, I'll pay you based on X amount of views at tiered rates. Hey, it can add up a lot more than you think. So I think it's a great move, especially right now. KSW is doing something similar. I would expect every promotion to do it. I wouldn't be surprised if LFA managed to, and some of the, feeder leagues started to push that stuff. But right now in the pandemic, it's a smart move. So that's why they're doing it. It's not just to blow up your screen and be like, hey, it's, here's all this advertising. It's partially that, but it's really to supplant some revenue they're losing out on right now. All right. So when this news broke, next topic, some of you had some choice words. Some of you were all about it. So the news I'm talking about is Cody Garbrandt versus Davison Figueiredo for the UFC flyweight title belt. Now, Garbrandt, just as some of you know, is 1-3 in his last 4. He did knock out Rafael Assunção. Great knockout. Beautiful, beautiful execution there. Loved it. But he's also been knocked out by TJ Dillashaw twice, Pedro Munoz. Not exactly a, hey, you deserve a title shot run. Why is the UFC doing this? Well, again, comes down to views. That's really what it's all about. I know some people have said it's because Ali Abdelaziz has some pull and is able to make those things happen. He has some influence, but really it's the promotion making a choice of here is a draw and we're going to put them in a situation where otherwise we're not going to necessarily have a draw for that title fight, even though they meritocratically, they don't deserve it. So you've seen this more recently with Aldo and Jan and that title fight. You're seeing it with Garbrandt and, Figueiredo. We've seen this happen many times before. We almost saw it with DC and Lesnar, right? That's probably the easiest example of a situation like this. It never came to be, but if Lesnar had ended up going with the UFC while he was negotiating his contracts between the WWE and UFC, I think for sure you would have gotten Brock Lesnar, who hadn't won since 2010, fighting DC, who would have just become a two weight class champion. So it comes down to drawing power. And for those of you that think that Garbrandt still doesn't have drawing power, you can look at, his YouTube videos on his embeddeds. You can look at his interviews in general. He tends to elevate and be elevated compared to his peers. I think a big part of that is transference. It's something that's not talked about a lot in the industry. I know John Nash has talked about it a couple times. A couple other business people have. But Look at Holly Holm. This is probably the best example in the world of transference is Holly Holm and Nate Diaz. So I'll go through both of those real quick. Holly Holm, right? No one really knew who she was. You might know of her if you followed UFC enough to say, oh, okay, right. I remember her split decision win over Raquel Pennington, or, her other decision. I forget who it was when she came in, but she was undefeated in MMA, had a boxing background, but not a lot of people knew her from that. And then she has the infamous knockout of Ronda Rousey, and they give her a day in Albuquerque. They give her headlining cards, and beyond headlining cards, she still ended up losing a lot after that Ronda Rousey win. She's been able to stave off Pennington, Betch Correia, those types of fighters, but she lost against Miesha Tate. She lost against Valentina Shevchenko. She didn't fare well against top contenders. That all being said, the reason why you will see her headlining so many cards, even to this day, where she's supposed to, fight Aldana, is she still brings in numbers. It's the crowd that came in for Ronda Rousey, just like I mentioned with my mom saying, oh, there's Paige VanZant. My mom also knew Ronda Rousey. A lot of people obviously knew Ronda Rousey. And the crowd that followed Ronda Rousey, a bunch of them left when Ronda left the sport and just said, okay, we're done. That was my fighter. I don't really want to watch this anymore. And those that stayed, a ton of them followed home and said, this is the next Ronda Rousey. And they're still hanging on to that. And again, go look at some of these embeddeds. Go look at some of Holly Holm's, videos. That's why she's in a Mountain Dew commercial. That's why she's still a draw, despite, having a middling record since her title win against Rousey. She's still a pretty big draw. She's still a recognizable name outside of the MMA space. So they're going to keep doing that. Nate Diaz, again, everybody knew him inside the MMA world, but the minute he beat Conor McGregor, everybody knew him. Everybody. And that's, again, the power of transference. Now people know Diaz. They know who Diaz is. I would argue that Masvidal got the transference from Diaz when he beat Diaz at 244. It's just simply how this works. Whenever there is a crossover star, when they fall, if they lose, which almost always happens inevitably, when they lose, they end up giving some of their star power over to whoever beat them. It's just a natural way of the sport. So to bring that full circle to Garbrandt, he went on a crazy tear and he dominated Dominic Cruz. He didn't knock him out, but it was 5 rounds of domination. And the UFC put the promotion machine behind him, and he was on a tear. He crushed it when he got that belt. He's still got that drawing power. It's going to take a while for him to die out as a drawing power type fighter outside of the normal MMA crowd, the hardcores that are probably watching this video. So with that in mind, they're using Aldo, they're using Garbrandt, they're giving these people title shots because they want to up buy rates, they want to up viewership in general. I think part of that is the gate and the structure that the UFC is in. They've been doing well. They're still very profitable in the pandemic, still able to put on shows and all of that. But you'll notice some things that I'll talk about in a different episode in terms of one thing to keep an eye out that I'll touch on a different episode is look at the amount of fighters that have, since quarantine has started, that have fought multiple times on these cards, on the lower end of the card. I think that's a big thing to keep an eye on. I think you're going to see more and more of that. And I'll explain why in a completely different episode, because that's a long topic. But Garbrandt is going to keep getting these title shots. Aldo, going to get title shots. It's going to keep happening. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. If Holm beats Aldana, she might get another title shot. It is what it is. So you could be grumpy about it, but your only other option is to get you and all the friends and everyone you know, and your mom, especially your mom, because that's, suburban housewife, to go ahead and watch some of your favorite hardcore fighters and get them to share videos and up those numbers, because I can guarantee you, if a UFC exec looks, or an intern or social media director or whatever looks and sees Davison Figueiredo has 500,000 views in a post-fight interview, he's going to get to fight whoever he wants, and you're going to see more meritocracy. Until then, sorry guys, this is sports entertainment. This is the biz. So another topic we want to get into here, fighter releases. Obviously, we've had a wave of them. Betch Correia, who I mentioned earlier on in the video, has been released. Evan Dunham, a longtime lightweight veteran, has been released. Max Rochoff might be the most notable that has been released, and here's why. It's not because he's the biggest name fighter. He took a very short notice fight, was undefeated, came in there fighting Austin Hubbard, and, was just getting the break speed off him. Was bad. He looked strong in the beginning, but then he kind of faltered, was an issue. Whether it was his cardio, whether it was he just didn't look like he was up to the caliber is debatable. I would say it was a little bit of both, that his cardio was probably weak from, the short notice fight. He wasn't prepping for one, and, he was undefeated, but I believe he was only 5-0. So it's not a guy with a ton of experience under his belt, even though he does have some wrestling accolades. So I get why there was hype around him. But either way, it's clear he's rough around the edges in a lot of ways and needs some work. But releasing him is an interesting decision, because I saw a lot of people say that's not fair. He took a fight on short notice. Dana even said after the fight he respected Rochoff's decision when the fight got called. Why is it fair to cut him? And the fact of the matter is it's not fair, but that's, it is good for business. And here's what I mean by that. When the UFC looks at a fighter like Rochoff and they get him to fight late notice in order to make up for a fight that was going to be canceled otherwise, or that fell through, that's great for them. And when they look at him as an undefeated prospect and then Austin Hubbard beats him, that gives Austin Hubbard a slight bump just because, hey, you beat this undefeated 5-0 prospect with a bunch of wrestling accolades. Nothing crazy, but it helps their overall image, right? Like, hey, this guy beat it. He was not favored at all, but he came in there and look, we only have high quality fighters here. The promotion can kind of use that as an advertisement of like, yeah, you never know who's going to win. It's not like we're bringing in scrubs. And that all favors the promotion. What doesn't favor the promotion is bringing him back after watching him and making the decision that he is not ready for the UFC yet. And while one could say, well, he should get another shot, he should get a full camp, he should get the pay that comes with another UFC shot, because obviously whatever he's making in the UFC is by far and away much bigger than what he's going to make on a regional promotion or even a feeder league like LFA, which I could see him going to in this case. He deserves that money for stepping up short notice. But again, from a UFC's perspective, what's the incentive? Why would I keep that? Because it's the fair thing? Because it's the right thing? The UFC, and I will say this every day of the week, 20 times on Sunday, the UFC always looks at everything from a business perspective. And if it's not what's best for business, they don't do it. Doesn't matter how they're feeling. Doesn't matter, the emotional human component that you and I feel as fans, that we feel as, being attached to a fighter because, he's a kid. He's done this. Come on, give him another shot. That doesn't benefit the UFC. The UFC looks at him at a number and says, hey, no, he's not ready for this yet. Push him back down. Let's save some money. Let's move along. He served his purpose for the machine. And because of that, you're always going to see the UFC make that move. If there had been widespread outcry about it, if news sites had, they touched on it, but if news sites had gone on saying, man, this is ridiculous, and every pundit under the sun said it was bad, and then fans got behind it and said, like, yeah, you got to give him another shot, I think in that case, they bring him back. I think then you would hear Dana say, oh, yeah, you know what? I thought it wasn't fair to the kid. Let's bring him back. But otherwise, of course, they're not going to do that. That's not what they're in the business for. It never has been. Matt Mitrione's infamous interview when he left for Bellator clearly stated, you go to, one of the last discussions he had with UFC executives was where he was saying the fighters were the product and they were arguing that the UFC is the product, the promotion is the product, not fighters. That's how they will always look at things. That is the most telling thing that has ever been said in regards to the organization and how they view fighters. And they have no incentive not to. People keep paying. You're still going to pay for the pay-per-views. You're still going to pay for ESPN. You're going to watch the fights. They have no incentive to change that business model. So it sucks he got released. I feel for him. I hope he wins and comes back. I hope that all of the fighters that got released end up doing that, because I want to see fighters succeed. But I'm not surprised, and I wouldn't hold my breath for him coming back without a major run on a regional or feeder league. And that's just the way it is. It's business. This is how the business works. In other news, Bellator ratings are up. Who would have thought? I haven't talked about Bellator ratings in I don't know how long. Pretty sure this news story just went under the radar for almost everybody because ratings haven't been really brought up for the UFC in a long time since they've switched over to ESPN Plus. But even Bellator's ratings, everyone just assumed they were going to constantly go into the toilet. They are higher than they have been since Bellator 214 when Bader fought Fedor. That's right. Duh. In the heavyweight tournament. 403,000 viewers. That's very high for Bellator. Generally, they're in the, a good day for Bellator is mid 300s, usually around 340,000 viewers or so. They're generally in the 200,000 range. 403,000 is good, especially on Paramount Network. That's good. Why? Well, first show back. So, it's been a while. Of course, you could see a lot of people that maybe occasionally tuned into Bellator are like, yeah, I'll watch. MMA fans, I know a lot of people that, aren't going to watch Bellator outside of the big fights. I saw some of them saying, yeah, I'm excited to see Bellator, see what they're doing, how they handle this whole situation. And you had a big fight with Chandler and Henderson. I mean, there's, it's not for a belt, but it's certainly an interesting fight. Had extreme ramifications for free agency, which I'll cover free agency in another video, but especially while all that's going on now, there's a lot to talk about there. But, it's not surprising that they got a bump if you look at the way the UFC has got a bump. And I know some of you are going to be like, what do you mean the UFC's got a bump? I don't know about all that. No, the UFC has gotten a massive bump from COVID-19 and the pandemic. They are the only sport that is on consistently that's somewhat major. Now you have NHL and MLB and NBA starting up again. You're going to see, I would imagine in some of the ratings, if for ESPN and things like that, you will see UFC start to decline a little bit. Pay-per-view buys, I would also imagine are going to drop a bit. I don't know how much, but I could see them dropping a fair amount. I could also see them being sustained. But the main thing is basically, Gaethje and Ferguson was rumored to be around 800,000 buys when prior to that, Gaethje had been headlining the lowest rated ESPN cards, and Ferguson had only been a headliner once where he had gotten around 216,000 buys when he fought Kevin Lee. So that is a massive increase. A huge part of that is no one had anything to watch, and so they were like, yes, please, let me tune in. Then you look at Nunes and Nunes' numbers against Spencer were never officially released, I don't believe. I want to say it was in the 700,000 range or 800,000 range. I remember Dana White saying it did well, so I would imagine that's accurate. But, again, Nunes has never been a huge drawing power. After she beat Cyborg, this really was her first pay-per-view since she beat Cyborg, where she was headlining. So under normal circumstances, this would have been a great test case to see how well she can draw following that win. But otherwise, I mean, she struggled. I mean, if you look at Pennington versus Nunes, that was 85,000 buys is what they estimated on that. That's not, she is not a huge drawing power. So that all being said, Masvidal, again, with the bump with Diaz, I think ended up escalating that to a huge level, including COVID. I think without COVID, I think that does under 1 million buys. I think it's still in the John Jones range of, 800,000 or so, but I think it dips. And again, it's COVID. It's, people aren't going out on Saturday nights and drinking. They're not going to a bar. They're not going out to a dance club. Hell, a lot of people generally aren't hanging out with other people physically anymore. So for MMA fans that may have been like, yeah, I will catch a Conor McGregor fight, or I will catch a John Jones fight, or, one of the bigger names, maybe a title fight. Okay, if I'm interested in DC versus Stipe 3, sure. I'll go to a bar that Saturday night and do it. But they're not regularly watching UFC on Saturday. I doubt they are going to every Saturday. They're saying, I got to make sure I'm at a bar so I can see the UFC fights. And I doubt they're watching every pay-per-view. I'm sure there are a lot of pay-per-views. They're like, who's fighting? Oh, it's, a flyweight title or what have you. No, that's cool. I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and just skip it. Or, oh, it's Shevchenko versus, somebody, or Nunes versus somebody. Nah, it's all right. I'll skip. Those people didn't have anything to do. Those people aren't out at clubs, aren't out, doing the other things that they normally would on a Saturday night. So they're much more likely to say, you know what, like, I'll go ahead and watch the fights, or have a couple people over and, we'll throw the fights on in the background or something. I see that much more as a reality, especially with the way that the virus has hit bars in particular. And a lot of places have just shut down bars completely. Internationally too, huge thing to remember is that 1.3 million pay-per-view buys that Masvidal and Usman did, a lot of that was international. It wasn't just domestic ESPN Plus. It was confirmed that was an international rate. That was a huge part of the Gaethje versus Ferguson buy rate as well. And remember, outside of the States, a lot of countries are taking the pandemic much more harshly in terms of shutting things down, making sure that much more strict rules in terms of what you can and cannot do. So with that all being said, I think Bellator got that COVID bump. I think this kind of proves that the UFC got a COVID bump as well, because again, you're talking about a sizable, significant ratings increase that, yes, Henderson versus Chandler is a great fight, but there was not a title fight. There was not a belt on the line. There were some names, but that was by far the biggest. The fact it drew that many viewers, I think, speaks to the general state of the sport being watched right now, and the casual fans or semi-casual fans watching. So, we'll see where it goes. We'll see how UFC 252 goes for a buy rate. I would expect it to be high, but I would also imagine that these are artificially inflated, and the longer time goes on, the more they're going to dip. So if you guys loved Fight Island as much as I did, and by Fight Island, I mean Fight Peninsula, which, that's what it was. But I love the spectacle of it. Don't get me wrong. I love the octagon on the beach. Kind of wish we would have had some fights in that octagon, but I get why you're not going to do it in 103-degree heat, or whatever it is Celsius, like 40 Celsius, I think is, I don't know. Either way. Anyway, Fight Island is coming back. Dana has said they're going to do another stint in Fight Island. They said this time it'll probably be 5 to 6 weeks. Not surprising. Why? Well, if you didn't follow it the first time, and actually before we dive into, the first Fight Island and how that all came to be, a while ago, there was some news out about how the UFC had reached an agreement with Abu Dhabi's tourism board, and basically had said, for 5 years, we're going to work with the tourism board to bring at least one big event here, have it in Abu Dhabi, do some promotional things of that nature. That was before Dustin Poirier versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. That was essentially when they had that fight there. That was a big part of it, was, hey, we're kicking off this 5-year deal where we're going to partner with the tourism board. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. Now, the terms of that deal were not specifically disclosed, but basically the UFC was getting paid a large sum of money to bring the fights there. I mean, taking care of everything, taking care of flights, taking care of hospitality, production. getting a fee on top of all of that. Now, where does this come back into Fight Island? Well, Yas Island is in Abu Dhabi, and basically this is part of that agreement. UFC gets to go to Fight Island, gets to hype all this stuff up, promote it as, yeah, we've got this island, we're doing this crazy stuff. Really what they're doing is fulfilling part of their partnership that they made prior to the Nurmagomedov-Poirier fight. And it's a great strategy. Again, they're getting paid for all this. They're getting a premium on top of all expenses, including production costs, being paid for them to set up and show these fights. Now, keep in mind, moving it to in the pandemic, I'm sure and even with production costs and all that, I'm sure Abu Dhabi's tourism is getting some kickbacks or something, given the pandemic situation. Normally, you'd have a bunch of people come into town, spend X amount of dollars. For those of you that don't know how events work, when a city makes an agreement to pay an event to come to their city, generally what happens is a study is done that says, when we hosted the Super Bowl, we were able to generate this amount of revenue into this many small businesses and local businesses, and this much traffic and use of our public facilities, which upped our rates by this percentage, blah, blah, blah. And basically meets a bunch of KPIs internally for the government that says, yes, this is, part of what we do. These are our initiatives, and it satisfies them by generating money that goes into the hand of the city and the government that then gets put back into, public works improvements, road repaving, stuff like that, or, parks, things, various city departments. So when the pandemic happens and they go to this Fight Island, that's obviously different because you're in a bubble, right? You are no longer are you getting all these crowds coming in and packed stadiums and then spending all this money on restaurants and different stores around, because Abu Dhabi had very strict restrictions. So it had this bubble, could only, had to be quarantined for a certain amount of times, and they double checked everything, did regular temperature checks. They were very strict about it. So I'm sure Abu Dhabi is getting some sort of kickback, whether it's percentage of pay-per-view buys or it's, extra events the UFC will put on for them at a later date. There's some kind of split going on there. But this whole thing is just, UFC basically fulfilling a partnership agreement that they made several years ago. So it's if you think Fight Island is like this wild thing that was come up, out of nowhere, and then that it's like, oh, this is what it was. Not at all the case. And my guess is they're going to do 5 to 6 weeks in Abu Dhabi this time. I would imagine the longer this goes on, I'm going to make a bold prediction right now, that they're going to go back to Fight Island at least one more time after the 5 to 6 week stint, simply because the United States right now is really trying to get a hold on this thing. And Abu Dhabi, that went very smoothly. You didn't have someone like Gerald Meerschaert testing positive and getting pulled from the fight. You didn't have all these last minute dropouts. Was pretty smooth because you knew right away, okay, are you good or are you not? We've quarantined you. We've made sure you're in this bubble. Makes a big difference. So I'm going to say they're going to go back one more time. But that's why they're going back to Fight Island for another 5 to 6 week stint. Okay, and to cap it all off, I'd like to bring it back to something that hasn't been talked about for a long time. Probably back from 2011, 2012, that's still going on and is important to track. And that is people illegally streaming UFC pay-per-views in bars. Not just people, we're talking about bar owners. So news broke, I believe, this past week in regards to ZUFFA versus Lake Alice Bar, a bar in Florida that was based off of UFC 239, where the bar apparently, it doesn't go into specifics, but apparently illegally streamed the UFC 239 pay-per-view from last year. And ZUFFA found out and sued them and was awarded summary judgment of, I believe, $10,000 plus $40,000 in some damages, things of that nature. The judge ultimately ended up saying that only $1,000 was going to be paid, that the bar had to pay $1,000 because they're in the pandemic now, and they realized that basically it's along the lines he made in his summary judgment, said something along the lines of, if they have to pay that much money right now in this crazy environment, they're going to go out of business. That seems counterintuitive. Really, we should make this more of a warning to the bar to say, like, you can't do this stuff. This is an issue. We don't want to actually put them out of business. So I think they're only paying $1,000, which is not terrible, especially considering what they did and what the amount of money that originally was going to the UFC. But the fact that the UFC is still doing this shows that that's something that they have never really given up on. Now, how many bars are illegally streaming UFC pay-per-views at this point? Hard to say. Obviously they're still out there and this was from a year ago, so that also shows just the length of time, the legal process that it takes for this to get done, because they filed this motion back last year. So it took about a year to get this resolved. But it's one of those things where people think about streaming in terms of illegal online streams now, something that wasn't big in 2011, 2012, where you had a lot more bars finding ways to, rig things up so that you would illegally stream pay-per-views. But they're still out there doing it. And more importantly, ZUFFA is still, and the UFC are still going after them. And the big factor with that is that the UFC, one might think that the UFC has no real incentive to do that, right? Like, how much money are they really going to make from some of these summary judgments, right? $1,000, that's not great. Even if they had gotten their actual summary judgment that was much higher, how much were the legal costs of paying the lawyers to pursue this, to gather the evidence, do all that? Was it really worth it? But it's more of a deterrent. It's more that's really what they're doing this for, is to say, hey, we're coming after each and every one of you so that we don't have the appearance of being relaxed. So a couple bars here and there look at that and say, you know what? I know Lake Alice Bar did this. I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot, because that takes away their revenue. Now, is it a huge part of their revenue? No, especially after the ESPN deal. I mean, you're talking drops in a barrel compared to what it used to be. But it's still part of their revenue model, and they are fiercely protective of that model. They always have been. That goes back to fighter pay and how they're trying to keep fighter pay at a set percentage so that they can have that projected growth each year to eventually, again, get more money from investors, and what I believe is eventually one day down the line go public. I think that's the end game with all this, but that's a ways out. That being said, they are fiercely competitive of the model so they can make that reality happen someday. And you look at another story that Bloody Elbow covered in regards to the torrent streamer, I believe Messina, in terms of $32 million summary judgment was given against this kid, essentially, who was uploading torrents of UFC pay-per-views. And they didn't try and recoup any money. They essentially just had a apology published that the torrent uploader said was fake, that he didn't believe a single word of, but he signed off on because he didn't want to deal with the UFC coming after him for money. So they basically went this whole route of $32 million in summary judgment to not try and get a single cent back and just get a public apology that says, oh, I felt really bad about what I did, and you shouldn't do this. It's terrible, all this, from the person that uploaded these torrents. Why do that? Because that's just sunk cost, right? That's still had to go through the court system, still had to go through, pay the lawyers to get that all together. Why would you do all this if you're not going to actually try and recoup money, even if the guy doesn't have any money or that much? Why not at least try and take something from him? Because the power lies in the deterrent. The public apology shows, hey, they caught me and I'm sorry. This was a terrible thing. It's that perception of, oh, if you do this, you're a bad person. And even though since he has gone on record saying he believes the UFC, shouldn't have gone after him. He doesn't regret what he did. He believes that people should be able to download these because it's generally because of they can't pay for it or it's not available in their area, which are good points. The whole thing was about public perception. It's to try and drill in your head that subliminally or directly, you're a bad person if you take a UFC pay-per-view and then you upload it so other people can illegally download it. It's if you ever remember those old DVDs where it was like you wouldn't, steal a house or you wouldn't steal a car, same type of crap. Like people would still pirate that stuff all the time. But it was all about this blasting you with imagery that says like, hey, you're a bad person if you do this. Similar to DARE programs for the US, those in the US, the anti-drug or in overseas where they'll show pictures of you buy cigarettes and here's pictures of the lung or some gross stuff. Like that's all to deter you to be like, hey, don't do this. It's bad. That's really what this was all about. That's what going after the bar in Florida was about. That's what going after the torn uploader was about. It's about this public perception of the UFC comes down hard on you and you're a bad person if you do this. They're not going to make that money back. They're not even losing that much money, but they have to protect that market share and they have to protect that perception that they will come after you in order to deter people that are thinking about doing this. Because if they were relaxed about it and they're like, yeah, you know what, I give up on streaming. I know it's going to be there. I'm not going to try and fight it. Then more and more people would do it. And it's only going to become easier as technology evolves, right? So they have to take that hard stance and they have to come down and bring that hammer down. So that's what you're looking at. And that's why they went after a bar in Florida for $1,000 from a pay-per-view that they probably, didn't even really gross any extra revenue on, and that ESPN all paid for. But that's what they do. I want to thank you for joining me on the Fight Business Podcast. Hope you like this stuff. Again, give it a like, subscribe, leave comments, open to any and all feedback. If you want to just say you don't like my face, well, you can do that. That's mean. I don't encourage that. I really don't encourage that, but you can. Technically, I can't stop you. But if you, again, want me to cover any subjects, want me to dive into anything, I'm here to do so. We will have guests. We will have interviews coming back on. We'll get that ramped up here. It won't always be a solo show, but want to keep this information flowing, especially with all the business news. So as Ant Walker would say, stay sexy, stay healthy, stay beautiful. Ant Walker. So there you go.